In the heart of Las Vegas, where legends clash and egos shatter, one man's bravado met the unbreakable calm of true mastery. In the roaring MGM Grand Arena, a calm, aging martial arts icon was about to face a storm of arrogance. A celebratory martial arts exhibition turned volatile when Conor McGregor publicly mocked Chuck Norris's weak punches and challenged him to prove himself. Chuck Norris wasn't your typical silver-haired celebrity. For over 50 years, he was a world karate champion, Air Force veteran, and teacher of countless fighters known for bringing traditional martial arts into full-contact combat. When McGregor lunged with theatrical MMA strikes, he had no idea he was walking into a masterclass in simplicity. Norris answered with effortless economy of motion. One shift, one strike, one controlled lesson that triggered the collapse of McGregor's facade before thousands. What began as mockery would become humiliation. The MGM Grand would never be the same after the night arrogance fell flat on the mat, and Chuck Norris showed the world the quiet strength of true mastery. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The MGM Grand Arena pulsed with raw energy. Every seat filled, every voice blending into a deafening roar that echoed off the walls. Floodlights beamed down onto the polished octagonal mat at center stage while cameras flashed like lightning as fans shouted from every corner. Some waved banners, others leaned forward on the edge of their seats, eyes locked on the fighters. The night's energy felt alive, almost electric, charged with the promise of something big. The martial arts exhibition had already delivered 2 hours of spectacular matches. Competitors from across disciplines had demonstrated their craft. The fluid grace of traditional kung fu masters, the explosive power of karate champions, the technical precision of jiu-jitsu practitioners. Each bout earned respectful applause, the crowd appreciating the skill and dedication on display. Ladies and gentlemen, the announcer's voice boomed through the speakers, cutting through the buzz of conversation that filled the intermission. Please welcome our special guest commentator for tonight's exhibition, the man himself, Conor McGregor. A spotlight swung across the arena, landing on a figure rising from the VIP section. Conor McGregor stood dressed in an ornate silk jacket, embroidered with dragons, his trademark beard trimmed sharp against his jaw. He raised one hand in acknowledgement, smiling broadly as a mixture of cheers and scattered boos rippled through the crowd. "Let's show some respect for a martial arts legend," the announcer urged, though something in his tone suggested even he found the title a stretch. McGregor made his way toward the center mat, every movement exaggerated as if performing for cameras that weren't there. He walked with the confident swagger that had become his signature in countless MMA press conferences over the years. Upon reaching the announcer, he took the microphone with a flourish, surveying the arena like a conquering emperor. "Vegas," he called out, his voice pitched to dramatic effect. "How many of you came here to see some real fighting?" The crowd responded with scattered applause, uncertain where this was heading. "Because that's what I do," McGregor continued, pacing the mat. "Real fighting, not choreographed, not prettied up for the cameras." He demonstrated a chopping motion with one hand, his face deadly serious. "One strike, that's all it takes when you know what you're doing." In the front row of the VIP section, Chuck Norris sat quietly, expression unreadable. At 75, his face carried the dignified lines of age, but his posture remained impeccable, shoulders squared and relaxed. He wore a simple black button-up shirt, no flashy accessories or attention-seeking displays. His eyes tracked McGregor's movement with the patient assessment of a man who had seen showboats come and go for decades. Near Chuck sat a teenage boy with his father, the young fan's eyes bright with excitement at being so close to legends. He clutched a program filled with signatures, leaning over occasionally to whisper observations to his dad. Across the arena, the commentator duo prepared for the exhibition's second half. Ray Martinez, the younger announcer, adjusted his headset with undisguised excitement. McGregor's really working the crowd tonight, he muttered to his partner. Frank Donovan, a veteran combat sports commentator with 30 years of experience, simply grunted. Let's see where he's going with this. Back at center mat, McGregor was warming to his theme, gesturing broadly as he spoke. You know, I've been in this business a long time. Trained with the best, taught the best. He paused for effect. And I've got to say, some of these so-called legends. His eyes drifted deliberately toward Chuck Norris. They're not all they're cracked up to be. A hush fell over sections of the crowd. Phones lifted, sensing drama unfolding. Take Chuck Norris over there, McGregor continued, pointing directly at Chuck. Great guy. Respect the career. But between us, he leaned into the microphone, lowering his voice conspiratorially. Those kicks wouldn't knock over a paper cup, and those punches, he made a dismissive gesture. Weak. Hollywood. Weak. The crowd's reaction was immediate and divided. Some laughed nervously, others gasped. Many turned to look at Chuck, whose expression hadn't changed. Calm, measured, giving away nothing. Oh, damn, Ray whispered into his dead microphone. Did he just? He did, Frank confirmed, eyes narrowing, and he picked the wrong man. The young fan in the front row tugged at his father's sleeve. Dad, he can't talk to Chuck Norris like that, can he? His father shook his head slowly. No, son, that's not how a martial artist behaves. McGregor, emboldened by the attention, continued his performance. He mimicked a roundhouse kick in slow motion, deliberately making it look awkward and ineffective. This is what passes for technique these days, he scoffed. But if you want to see real power, he snapped his wrist forward in one of his trademark MMA movements. That's how it's done. One move, devastating. Throughout the arena, phone cameras recorded every moment. Social media was already lighting up with clips of the insult. The exhibition organizers looked at each other uneasily from the sidelines, uncertain whether to intervene. In his seat, Chuck remained motionless. He didn't flinch, didn't scowl, didn't react visibly to the mockery, but something in his eyes had changed. A focus, sharpening, like a lens adjusting to bring a distant object into perfect clarity. The referee for the evening's bouts, Miguel Santos, stepped closer to the edge of the mat, sensing the shift in the arena's atmosphere. A veteran of countless fights, he recognized the electric tension of real conflict brewing beneath the surface of showmanship. McGregor, misreading the crowd's mixed reaction as encouragement, decided to push further. In fact, he said, swaggering across the mat, I've got an idea to make this exhibition a little more interesting. He turned fully toward Chuck now. What do you say, Chuck? Want to show these people what you've got, or? His voice dropped mockingly. Are those old bones too brittle these days? The crowd erupted, some in shocked laughter, others in disapproval, but all eyes turned to Chuck Norris, waiting for his response. Chuck's gaze remained steady, locked on McGregor with the unblinking focus of a man who had faced down real threats long before cameras ever rolled. For several heartbeats, he didn't move at all. The seconds stretched, silence spreading through the arena as people held their breath. Then, with deliberate calm, Chuck placed his hands on his knees and stood. Chuck Norris rose from his seat with the quiet dignity of a man who had nothing to prove and knew it. No hurry in his movements, no reaction to the gasps that rippled through the arena as he stood. He simply straightened his black shirt with a casual adjustment, eyes never leaving McGregor's face. The crowd's reaction was immediate. Murmurs swelled into shouts. Phones lifted higher. Camera flashes intensified. The commentators leaned forward in their booth. Frank Donovan's expression grave while Ray Martinez practically vibrated with excitement. I don't believe it, Ray hissed into his microphone, which was now live. Ladies and gentlemen, Chuck Norris appears to be responding to Conor McGregor's challenge. Frank's voice cut in, measured and serious. For those who don't know their history, These two have never faced each other on screen or off. Chuck built his reputation through legitimate competition before his acting career. McGregor has a different background. Across the arena, McGregor's expression flickered briefly, a momentary crack in his smug facade. He hadn't expected Chuck to actually respond. The microphone trembled almost imperceptibly in his hand before he doubled down, his grin stretching wider. "Well, well," McGregor announced, voice booming with forced bravado. "Looks like the legend himself is interested. Come on down, Chuck. Let's give these people their money's worth." Chuck took one deliberate step forward, then another. He moved unhurried toward the mat, his gait smooth and balanced. No dramatic gestures, no playing to the crowd, just the measured advance of a man who had walked into countless dojos, rings, and arenas over a lifetime of martial arts mastery. The crowd began to divide itself, voices rising in competing chants. "McGregor! McGregor!" From one section, immediately countered by louder calls of "Chuck, Chuck, Chuck," rippling through the stands. From his commentary position, Ray was practically breathless with excitement. "Frank, this is unprecedented. Two action legends potentially squaring off. What are we even seeing right now?" Frank's voice remained calm, but an undercurrent of tension ran through it. "We're seeing a man who spent decades building a reputation on respect and discipline, being publicly challenged by someone who hasn't." The teenage fan in the front row clutched his program tightly, eyes wide with disbelief. "Dad, is this really happening? Is Chuck Norris actually going to fight?" His father leaned forward, shaking his head slowly. "I don't think it's going to be a fight, son. I think it's going to be a lesson." On the mat, McGregor was playing to the crowd, performing exaggerated stretches and shadow boxing movements. He threw a few MMA hand techniques toward the ceiling, smirking as he caught Chuck's approach from the corner of his eye. "Look at this," he called out, voice carrying across the arena. "Hollywood's toughest cowboy coming to the real world." He spun toward the crowd, arms spread wide. "Should I take it easy on him? What do you think, Vegas?" A mix of cheers and boos answered him. The exhibition organizers had gathered in a tight cluster at the edge of the mat, whispering frantically. One gestured toward security, but another shook his head. The crowd was too invested now. Stopping this would cause more problems than letting it play out. Chuck had reached the edge of the mat. He paused, meeting the gaze of referee Santos with a slight nod, a professional acknowledgement between men who respected the disciplines they served. Santos returned the nod, his expression conveying a simple message. "I'll keep this fair." McGregor noticed the exchange and stepped forward, hands on his hips. "We don't need officials for this, Chuck. Just you and me showing these people some real techniques, unless—" He tilted his head mockingly. "You need the rules to protect you?" The insult hung in the air, clumsy and obvious. Chuck's expression didn't change. He simply removed his watch, passing it to the young fan in the front. Rao, without looking away from McGregor. The boy's mouth dropped open as he accepted the watch with trembling hands. "Thank you, Mr. Norris," he stammered. Chuck gave him the barest hint of a smile, the first expression he'd shown since McGregor began his taunts. Then he turned back to the mat and stepped up, moving to stand opposite McGregor with calm precision. Up close, the contrast between the two men was striking. McGregor, taller and heavier, clad in his ornate silk jacket, still performing for the crowd with expansive gestures. Chuck, more compact, but radiating solid presence, standing perfectly still, hands loose at his sides, no wasted movement, no unnecessary display. "Ladies and gentlemen," Ray's voice came through the speakers, almost quivering with excitement. "I can't believe what we're seeing. Chuck Norris and Conor McGregor are facing off in the center of our exhibition mat." Frank's deeper voice followed, a note of warning evident. "This is completely unscheduled, folks. These men are in their prime and beyond, both martial arts veterans with very different styles and approaches. McGregor primarily trained in MMA, while Norris has backgrounds in Tang Soo Do, karate, judo, and Brazilian jiu-jitsu, plus a legitimate competitive record." The exhibition's main organizer finally stepped onto the mat, approaching with his hands, raised pleadingly. "Gentlemen, while we appreciate the enthusiasm, this isn't part of our program." "The people want to see this," McGregor cut him off, gesturing to the crowd. "Right, Vegas?" The answering roar was deafening. The organizer looked helplessly at Chuck, who simply nodded, once calm, controlled, accepting whatever came next. The organizer backed away, defeated by the momentum of the moment. Referee Santos stepped forward instead, assuming his professional role despite the unorthodox situation. "If we're doing this," Santos said firmly, looking between both men, "we do it properly. Clean techniques I call stops, and either of you can end it at any time. Understood?" Sure, McGregor said dismissively, shrugging off his silk jacket, to reveal a tight black t-shirt stretched over his substantial frame. He handed the jacket to a nearby assistant with a flourish, then rolled his neck dramatically. "Let's not waste time with formalities." Chuck simply nodded to Santos, a gesture of respect between professionals. The referee looked between them one last time, then stepped back, raising his hand. The crowd fell into an expectant hush. "Ready?" Santos called. McGregor immediately dropped into an exaggerated fighting stance, hands raised in MMA position, expression intense. Chuck remained standing normally, hands at his sides, posture relaxed but perfectly balanced. "Begin." Santos brought his hand down. The exhibition had just become something else entirely. The MGM Grand Arena had witnessed countless moments of athletic drama over the years. Championship boxing matches, UFC title fights, wrestling spectaculars, but the electricity coursing through the crowd now possessed a different quality. This wasn't choreographed entertainment or scheduled competition. This was something raw and unplanned, a collision of egos and philosophies that no promotion could have orchestrated. Chuck Norris approached the exhibition mat with measured steps, each footfall deliberate, shoulders relaxed, gaze unwavering. At 75, the lines on his face told stories of decades spent in dojos, movie sets, and competition rings. But his posture betrayed none of the concessions typically made to age. He moved with the fluid economy of a man who had spent a lifetime refining the connection between mind and body. In the commentary booth, Ray Martinez was practically bouncing in his seat. "Frank, this is unprecedented. Chuck Norris is actually responding to McGregor's challenge. When was the last time we saw these two legends in the same ring?" "They've never shared a ring," Frank Donovan cut in, his voice carrying the gravity of someone who understood what they were witnessing wasn't entertainment, but something more consequential. Never competed against each other, never collaborated, on film. Their paths have deliberately not crossed for decades. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Why is that?" Ray asked, genuinely curious. Frank's pause was telling. "Different philosophies," he finally said, the diplomatic answer of a man who knew far more than he was willing to say on air. On the mat, McGregor continued his performance, executing exaggerated MMA moves for the crowd's benefit, sweeping hand gestures, dramatic stances, the theatrical facial expressions that had become his trademark in dozens of press conferences and fights. With each move, he glanced toward the approaching Chuck, his smile fixed, but his eyes calculating. "Come on down, Chuck," McGregor called out, voice pitched to carry across the arena. "Let's give these people a real demonstration." He punctuated the invitation with a chopping motion that sliced through the air, eliciting scattered applause from his supporters. The exhibition organizers had clustered at the edge of the mat, their expressions ranging from concern to resignation. The head organizer, a former karate champion named Martin Chen, stepped forward to intercept Chuck. "Mr. Norris," he said quietly, "this isn't necessary. We can handle this situation." Chuck met his gaze briefly, respect evident in the small nod he offered. "I know. he replied, his voice low and even. But some lessons need to be taught in person. Chen studied him for a moment, then stepped aside with reluctant understanding. He'd trained in traditional martial arts long enough to recognize when someone was acting from principle rather than emotion. The teenage fan in the front row clutched his program so tightly the paper crinkled. "Dad," he whispered urgently, "is Chuck Norris really going to fight?" His father, a lifelong martial artist who had brought his son to the exhibition specifically to witness traditional techniques, shook his head slightly. "No, Tommy, I don't think it's going to be a fight." He paused, watching Chuck's approach, with knowing eyes. "I think it's going to be a demonstration of the difference between appearance and substance." Tommy looked confused. "What do you mean?" "Just watch. Really watch. Not just what they do, but how they do it." Chuck had reached the edge of the mat now. He paused, removing his watch, a simple timepiece without flash or ostentation. His eyes scanned the front row, settling on Tommy. With a small movement that somehow contained both warmth and respect, he extended the watch to the boy. "Would you hold this for me?" he asked, his Texas accent mild but distinct. Tommy's mouth fell open as he accepted the watch with trembling hands. "Yes, sir. Mr. Norris, I'll take good care of it." The corner of Chuck's mouth lifted slightly. Not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement. Then he turned back to the mat, his expression settling into focused neutrality as he stepped up onto the elevated surface. The crowd's reaction was immediate and electric. Phones lifted higher, recording from every angle. The chants began to swell, some calling, "McGregor," but more voices rising with, "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" The sound rolled through the arena like thunder. Referee Miguel Santos moved to center mat, his experienced eyes assessing both men. He'd officiated thousands of matches across multiple disciplines, but nothing in his experience had prepared him for mediating between two aging action stars with deeply opposed approaches to martial arts. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the formal authority of his position. "If we're proceeding with this demonstration, we'll do so. Under exhibition rules, technical control at all times. I can stop the action at any point. Is that understood?" "Sure. Sure," McGregor waved dismissively, shrugging off his ornate silk jacket to reveal a tight black t-shirt stretched across his substantial frame. He handed the jacket to an assistant with a flourish. The assistant took the jacket, nearly staggering under its unexpected weight. The garment was heavy with elaborate embroidery and what appeared to be genuine jade buttons. Costume, rather, than function. Appearance over substance. Chuck simply nodded to Santos. A professional acknowledgement between men who respected the disciplines they served. His button-up black shirt remained in place, practical, unadorned, chosen for comfort, rather than display. The contrast between the two men had never been more stark. McGregor, larger and heavier, adorned in flashy attire and theatrical expressions. Chuck, more compact but radiating solid presence, standing with quiet dignity, no wasted movement, no unnecessary display. Santos looked between them one final time, then stepped back, raising his hand to signal the beginning of the exhibition. "When you're ready," he announced, "you may proceed." McGregor immediately dropped into an exaggerated MMA stance, feet wide, knees bent, hands positioned in a traditional guard, his face set in an intense expression that might have appeared intimidating on a fight poster. But here, under the arena lights against a man who wasn't acting, it seemed oddly performative. Chuck remained standing naturally, hands relaxed at his sides, weight distributed evenly. To the untrained eye, he appeared almost casual, but experienced martial artists in the crowd recognized the foundation of true readiness. No telegraphing, no wasted energy, just perfect balance and complete awareness. "What's he doing?" Ray whispered into his microphone. Norris isn't even taking a stance. Frank's voice carried the wisdom of decades in combat sports. He doesn't need to posture. Watch his eyes. Indeed, Chuck's gaze remained steady, focused not just on McGregor's hands or feet, but on his center, reading intention rather than technique, essence rather than form. McGregor began circling, feet sliding across the mat in exaggerated steps that seemed designed more for cameras than combat. "Come on, Chuck," he called out, voice pitched for the crowd. "Show me something, or are you just going to stand there, like in your movies?" The taunt hung in the air, clumsy and obvious. Chuck didn't respond verbally. He simply adjusted his position with minimal movement, always facing McGregor, maintaining optimal distance without effort. In the third row, a retired judo instructor leaned toward his companion. "Look at that economy of motion," he murmured. "Norris hasn't wasted a single movement." His friend, a Taekwondo black belt, nodded in appreciation. That's the difference between someone who trains for the camera and someone who trained for combat before ever stepping on a set. McGregor, growing impatient with Chuck's lack of engagement, stepped closer and executed a quick, showy feint, a hand technique that sliced through the air several inches from Chuck's face. When Chuck didn't flinch or back away, McGregor's ID performance faltered momentarily, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his features. He recovered quickly, turning to play to the crowd. "See that? All Hollywood, no real fighting spirit." He demonstrated another exaggerated technique, this one a sweeping gesture meant to mimic disarming an opponent. This is real MMA, folks, not that watered-down movie stuff. Throughout this display, Chuck remained centered, his breathing even, his posture unchanged. His patience was not passive, but active. The disciplined waiting of a man who had learned that timing was everything, both in combat and in life. The young fan, Tommy, clutched Chuck's watch tightly, barely breathing as he watched. "Why isn't he doing anything, Dad?" he whispered. His father smiled slightly. "He's doing everything, son. Look at his eyes. Look at his balance. He's letting McGregor expose himself without having to say a word." Indeed, with each passing moment of Chuck's composed silence, McGregor's movements became more elaborate, more exaggerated, a peacock spreading its feathers wider and wider, desperately seeking attention. The contrast between them deepened, one man trying to appear dangerous, the other simply being dangerous. "This is ridiculous," McGregor announced to the crowd, voice carrying a new edge of frustration. "Let me show you how we did it in the cage." He stepped closer to Chuck, attempting to invade his space with his larger frame. Real MMA isn't for show. It's about control. He lunged forward with an MMA wrist grab, the kind of technique that worked well in demonstrations with compliant partners. His hand shot out to seize Chuck's forearm in what should have been the setup for a standard joint lock. The moment crystallized everything about their different approaches to martial arts. McGregor's movement was technically correct by MMA standards, but it carried the expectation of a cooperative partner, someone who would allow themselves to be manipulated for the purpose of demonstration. It was a technique born of controlled environments and choreographed exchanges. Chuck's response emerged from a different reality entirely. His arm wasn't where McGregor expected it to be, not because he had jerked away in a dramatic evasion, but because he had made a minimal adjustment that caused McGregor to grasp empty air. No flashy dodge, just absence where McGregor expected resistance. The simplicity of it was what made it so devastating. Chuck hadn't needed to counterattack or execute a complex defensive technique. He had simply not been where the attack was, aimed. With the minimal expenditure of energy necessary, McGregor stumbled slightly, his momentum carrying him forward when he met no opposition. He recovered quickly, turning the stumble into a spin that he tried to make appear intentional. But a murmur had already rippled through the crowd. On the sidelines, Santos watched closely, but didn't interfere. No contact had been made, nothing to adjudicate. "Did you see that?" Ray's excited voice came through the speakers. Norris just made McGregor miss without even appearing to move. Economy of motion, Frank explained, his voice carrying the gravity of understanding, the hallmark of someone who's internalized their training. No wasted energy. No show. Just function. McGregor circled again, his breathing slightly heavier now. Not from physical exertion, but from the mounting pressure of the moment. The calm in Chuck's eyes was becoming its own form of challenge. Not aggressive, not taunting, but implacably present. "Come on, Chuck," McGregor said, voice louder now, an edge of genuine frustration breaking through his theatrical delivery. "Stop evading. Throw something. Or are those famous kicks just for the camera to edit later?" Chuck remained centered, his expression unchanging. But something shifted in his eyes, a focus sharpening. Assessing McGregor not as a performer but as an opponent. McGregor, misreading the subtle change, pressed what he perceived as an advantage. "Here, let me remind you how it's done." He launched into a sequence of MMA movements, each one more elaborate than the last. Hands flowing through defensive postures that transitioned into theoretical joint locks and throws. To the untrained eye, the display might have been impressive: fluid motion, complex hand positions, dramatic shifts of balance. But the martial artists in the crowd recognized the performance quality of the movements. These were techniques that required cooperative partners to execute effectively, movements designed to look good rather than function under pressure. Throughout the demonstration, Chuck remained still, watching, not backing away, not engaging, simply observing with the patience of a man who had faced real combat and recognized the difference between performance and function. In the front row, Tommy watched with wide eyes, still clutching Chuck's watch. "Those moves look amazing," he whispered to his father. "Why doesn't Chuck Norris do anything like that?" His father leaned closer. "Because Mr. Norris doesn't need to look impressive," he explained quietly. "He only needs to be effective. What you're seeing from McGregor is martial arts as performance. What you'll see from Chuck when he moves is martial arts as discipline." McGregor finished his sequence with a flourish, then spread his arms wide toward the audience. "That's real MMA," he announced. "Not Hollywood stuff." He turned back to Chuck, breathing slightly heavier now, sweat beginning to gleam on his forehead under the arena lights. "Your turn, legend. Show us something real if you can." The challenge hung in the air. The crowd had grown quiet enough that the hum of the arena's ventilation system was audible. Phones remained raised, capturing every moment of the confrontation that was rapidly transcending mere entertainment to become something more consequential. A clash not just of bodies, but of philosophies, not just of techniques, but of truths. Then, with deliberate calm, Chuck stepped forward. The movement was so simple, so understated that it shouldn't have raised goosebumps along the arms of every fighter watching. He took one step directly towards McGregor, closing distance with perfect balance and control. Just one step, but something. About it, the precision, the intent, the absolute absence of hesitation caused McGregor to instinctively back up. The crowd saw it. The commentator saw it. Tommy saw it, his young eyes widening with sudden understanding. One man advancing, one man retreating. In that single exchange of positioning, something fundamental had been revealed about both. "Oh my," Frank's voice was barely a whisper into his microphone. And there it is, the truth laid bare in the simplest of movements. One seeking battle, the other having known it. One performing martial arts, the other embodying them. One man who practiced techniques, and one who had absorbed principles so deeply they had become inseparable from his being. The real demonstration was just beginning. The arena had fallen into a hushed anticipation, the kind of silence that carries weight. McGregor had recovered from his momentary retreat, squaring his shoulders and reassuming his theatrical stance. The flicker of uncertainty that had crossed his face was buried beneath renewed bravado, his eyes narrowing as he reassessed his approach. "So, you can take a step forward," he announced, loud enough for the front rows to hear. "Let's see if you remember how to do anything else." Chuck remained centered, his breathing even, hands still relaxed at his sides. To the casual observer, he might have appeared vulnerable, no guard raised, no defensive posture. But to those who understood combat, his readiness was evident in subtler signs. The perfect distribution of weight between both feet, the slight bend in his knees, the calm alertness in his eyes that tracked everything while fixating on nothing. McGregor circled again, this time more cautiously. His earlier showmanship had given way to something more calculating. Whatever he might have expected from this confrontation, Chuck's composed stillness wasn't it. He had prepared for resistance, for opposition, for a classic exchange of techniques. Instead, he faced something far more challenging. The simple truth of efficiency confronting his elaborate performance. "Ladies and gentlemen," Frank's voice carried through the arena speakers, measured and insightful. "What we're witnessing is fascinating from a martial arts perspective. McGregor comes from MMA, an art that traditionally relies on aggressive striking and grappling, but MMA practice often involves high-intensity sparring. Norris's background spans multiple disciplines, including Tang Soo Do, karate, and Brazilian jiu-jitsu, with actual competitive experience. Ray's excited voice jumped in. "So what does that mean for this matchup?" "It means," Frank replied, "that McGregor is accustomed to opponents who engage aggressively. Chuck is giving him nothing to work with." In the front row, Tommy leaned forward, still clutching Chuck's watch. "Dad, why won't Chuck attack?" he whispered. "He's just standing there." His father nodded, eyes never leaving the mat. "Because he understands something fundamental about fighting that most people never grasp. The first person to move often loses. But McGregor's been moving all over the place." "Exactly," his father said quietly. "And look what it's gotten. Him." On the mat, McGregor had apparently reached the limits of his patience. "Enough dancing," he declared, loud enough for the crowd to hear. "Let me show you what real MMA looks like." He charged forward with surprising speed for his size, executing a textbook MMA entry, the kind designed to capture an opponent's center and control their balance. His target was Chuck's lead arm, his intent to establish a grip that would allow him to demonstrate a wrist lock or joint manipulation. What happened instead became the moment that martial arts instructors would dissect for years afterward. Chuck didn't back away from the charge. He didn't raise his hands in a traditional guard. As McGregor committed to his forward momentum, Chuck made a single, almost casual adjustment to his stance. A subtle shift of weight from center to his rear foot accompanied by a minimal turn of his torso. The movement was so economical that many missed it entirely, but its effect was immediate. McGregor's grabbing hand met empty air where Chuck's wrist should have been. His forward momentum, suddenly unopposed, carried him past his target. In the split second where his balance was compromised, Chuck's hand moved, not in a dramatic strike or cinematic technique, but in a simple, efficient palm placement against McGregor's passing shoulder. The contact was light, almost gentle, but the timing was perfect, catching McGregor at the precise moment when his weight was forward and his structure compromised. McGregor stumbled, taking 3 awkward steps to avoid falling completely. He caught himself, turning back with a flush spreading across his face. The crowd erupted in astonishment, not because they'd witnessed some spectacular technique, but because they'd seen something more revealing. The fundamental difference between theory and application, between performance and function. "Textbook tai sabaki," observed Frank, using the Japanese term for body management. Norris didn't need to attack. He simply helped McGregor's momentum continue where it was already going. "But he barely touched him," Ray protested. "There was no technique." "That was the technique," Frank replied. "Perfect timing, minimal force, maximum effect. The foundation of all effective martial arts. In the VIP section, several professional fighters leaned forward, their casual interest transformed into focused attention. A UFC champion turned to his coach, speaking in a low voice. "Did you see that weight shift? So clean." His coach nodded. Old school mastery, no wasted motion. McGregor's face, now openly showing frustration, circled again. The theatrical quality of his movement had diminished, replaced by the more authentic body language of a man whose confidence had been shaken. "Lucky timing," he announced to the crowd, though his voice had lost its projected resonance. "Let's try something with a little more intent." This time he approached more methodically, hands raised in a modified MMA guard position. When he closed distance, he launched a sequence of hand strikes, chopping motions aimed at Chuck's neck and shoulders, the kind that looked impressive in training and film sets, but rarely appeared in actual combat. Chuck's response was again understated, but technically flawless. He didn't attempt to match McGregor's elaborate movements. Instead, he employed basic, fundamental blocks, the kind taught to beginners in any traditional martial art, executed with perfect precision. Each of McGregor's attacks was met with just enough resistance to neutralize it. No more, no energy wasted. The efficiency was almost beautiful in its simplicity. No dramatic movements, no flashy counters, just the precise application of fundamentals that any first-year martial arts student would recognize. The difference was in the execution, the timing, the distance management, the complete absence of telegraphing. After the fourth blocked strike, Chuck countered, not with a cinematic blow, but with a simple straight punch that stopped just short of McGregor's solar plexus. The punch itself wasn't remarkable. What was remarkable was how Chuck had found the opening, the precise moment when McGregor's guard had dropped during his elaborate sequence. The punch demonstrated timing and control that made several martial arts instructors in the audience nod in quiet appreciation. "Perfect Kizami-zuki," murmured a karate sensei in the third row. "Lead hand straight punch timed precisely when the opponent creates an opening." His student looked confused. "But it wasn't powerful." "It didn't need to be," the sensei explained. "In real combat, that punch would have landed clean. The control to stop it just short. That's mastery." McGregor stepped back, his breathing now audibly heavier. Sweat darkened his black t-shirt, around the collar and underarms. "Not bad for an old man," he said, the forced humor in his voice fooling no one. Chuck simply reset his position, hands returning to his sides, posture relaxed, but ready. His breathing remained even, his expression composed. The contrast between the two men had become increasingly stark, one laboring physically and emotionally, the other in complete conservation of energy. In the commentary booth, Ray was unusually quiet, watching with newfound respect. Frank filled the silence, his voice carrying decades of martial arts insight. "What we're seeing," he explained, "is the difference between someone who practices techniques and someone who embodies principles. McGregor knows MMA movements. Norris understands combat physics." On the mat, McGregor had switched tactics. "Control," he said loudly, having overheard commentary from the crowd. "You want to see control? Let's stop playing around." He launched, forward again, this time with a more committed attack. A combination of MMA hand techniques, transitioning into a foot sweep intended to unbalance his opponent. The sequence was faster, sharper, clearly drawing on McGregor's actual training, rather than his performative style. For those in the audience with martial arts experience, this was McGregor's first genuinely respectable offensive sequence, techniques linked with proper timing, actual intent behind them rather than mere show. Whatever else might be said about him, he did possess legitimate MMA training, and in this moment, pressed by genuine challenge, he accessed it. Chuck evaded the initial rush with minimal movement, sidestepping just enough to avoid the brunt of McGregor's charge. But instead of completely avoiding engagement, he allowed McGregor's technique to make contact, a teaching moment that experienced martial artists immediately recognized. As McGregor's hands sought purchase for a joint lock, Chuck used fundamental Tai Chi principles, yielding while maintaining structure, absorbing force while remaining rooted. When McGregor attempted the foot sweep, Chuck's base remained solid, unmoved by the pressure that should have compromised his balance. For a brief moment, they were locked in close proximity, McGregor's techniques failing to achieve their intended effect. Despite his greater size and strength, the contrast was striking. McGregor straining, muscles tense, expression fierce, Chuck relaxed, breathing even, face composed. In that moment of connection, something passed between them, an unspoken communication that only happens when trained. Bodies interact under pressure. McGregor could feel the solidity of Chuck's structure, the impossible stability that didn't fight force, but simply refused to be moved by it. And Chuck could feel the fundamental disconnect in McGregor's technique. The gap between form and function that came from training primarily with aggressive intent but lacking true foundational control. Then Chuck executed a simple technique taught in basic self-defense classes worldwide, a centerline push, timed perfectly as McGregor's weight shifted forward. The contact wasn't hard or aggressive. It was the timing and placement that made it effective, sending McGregor back several steps before he could catch his balance. Fundamental application of opposing force, Frank commented. Nothing flashy, nothing complex, just perfect understanding of balance and timing. Ray seemed bewildered. But he's not really fighting. Where are the spinning kicks? The flying techniques? This is Chuck Norris, the man who made the roundhouse kick famous. Frank sighed. He doesn't need them, Ray. This isn't about showing off. It's about demonstrating the difference between martial arts as performance and martial arts as discipline. Tommy looked up at his father, processing what he was witnessing. Dad, Chuck's moves are so simple. I thought he'd be doing amazing stuff like in his movies. His father nodded thoughtfully. That's the most important lesson here, son. In movies, martial arts look spectacular because they need to entertain. In reality, effective martial arts often look underwhelming because they're designed to work, not to impress. In the center of the mat, McGregor's frustration was becoming increasingly evident. His movements had lost their theatrical quality, now showing genuine urgency and aggression. He closed distance again, abandoning the MMA approach, for more direct striking techniques, jabs and crosses that carried real intent behind them. This shift revealed something significant about both men. Under pressure, McGregor abandoned the art he claimed mastery in, reverting to more basic, direct methods. Chuck, by contrast, remained consistent, his approach unchanged, his principles solid regardless of what was thrown at him. Chuck's defense remained economical but effective. He parried rather than blocked, deflected rather than absorbed, each movement just sufficient to neutralize the attack. When he countered, his techniques were basic but perfectly executed. Straight, punches, simple kicks to the lower body, all controlled, all pulled short of full contact. A karate master in the second row leaned toward his colleague. "Look at that high kite," he murmured, referring to the pulling hand motion that accompanied each of Chuck's strikes. Perfect retraction, generating power without telegraphing. That's something you don't learn on movie sets. His colleague nodded. His zanshin is impeccable. He used the Japanese term for the state of continued awareness and readiness. Always balanced, always prepared for the next move. The pattern continued for nearly a minute. McGregor attacking with increasing intensity, Chuck defending with consistent control. The difference in their energy expenditure became obvious to everyone watching. McGregor's movements grew more labored, his breathing heavier, sweat now streaming down his face. Chuck remained composed, his breathing even, his movements as fresh as when they'd begun. In this contrast lay the most profound lesson of the encounter. Efficiency isn't just a technical principle in martial arts. It's the foundation of true effectiveness. Every unnecessary movement, Every wasted ounce of energy represented a fundamental misunderstanding of combat reality. Finally, McGregor backed, away, chest heaving. He wiped sweat from his forehead with the back of his hand. "Is this all you've got, Chuck?" he demanded, voice ragged. "Just defense? Just running away?" The question hung in the air, revealing more about the asker than the asked. In that moment, McGregor had inadvertently exposed the philosophical gulf between them, the belief that effectiveness was measured in aggression rather than control, in dominance rather than mastery. Chuck regarded him steadily, then glanced at Santos. The referee, understanding the unspoken question, nodded once. Chuck turned back to McGregor, and for the first time since the confrontation began, he spoke. "I'm not running." His voice was quiet, but carried clearly across the silent arena. "I'm teaching." The three words cut through the arena like a blade, clean and precise. They weren't delivered with malice or mockery, simply as a statement of fact. The truth distilled to its essence. The crowd erupted in a mixture of gasps, cheers, and applause. The sound rolled through the space like a wave, building as the implication of Chuck's statement registered with everyone present. This wasn't a fight. It wasn't even an exhibition. It was a lesson. In the commentary booth, Ray was momentarily speechless. Frank simply nodded, a small smile touching his lips. "And there it is," he said quietly. "The difference between someone who performs martial arts and someone who lives them." McGregor stood frozen for a moment, the words hitting harder than any physical technique could have. His face flushed deeper, a complex mixture of emotions playing across his features: anger, embarrassment, and perhaps, just possibly, the first glimmer of understanding. Then his expression hardened, pride overriding any potential for insight. "Teaching," he scoffed, voice strained with exertion and wounded ego. "Let me show you who the real teacher is." And with that, he charged forward again, abandoning all pretense of technique for raw aggression. The final phase of their encounter was about to begin, and with it, the culmination of the lesson Chuck had been delivering all along, not with words, but with the quiet eloquence of mastery. The MGM Grand Arena trembled with anticipation. Every person from the front row VIPs to those in the highest seats leaned forward. Phones held aloft, breaths collectively held. The exhibition mat had become more than a performance space. It had transformed into something ancient and profound, a place of truth. Chuck Norris's words still hung in the air. "I'm not running, I'm teaching." Those 5 syllables had cut through the arena's atmosphere, leaving McGregor momentarily stunned. For the briefest instant, a flash of something like recognition had crossed his face, the possibility of understanding, of humility, of growth. But pride is a powerful force, particularly when it has been nurtured for decades. And McGregor's swiftly reasserted itself, his face flushed deeper, a crimson tide rising from his neck to his hairline. Sweat glistened on his forehead under the arena lights, his breathing ragged, not from exertion, but from the emotional storm brewing within him. His eyes, which had earlier glinted with theatrical menace, now burned with something more authentic. Wounded ego transformed into genuine anger. "Teaching," he scoffed, voice strained, the word emerging as both question and challenge. "Let me show you who the real teacher is." Something had fundamentally changed. The theatrical quality that had characterized McGregor's earlier movements had vanished completely. In its place was raw emotion, pride, humiliation, desperation channeled into physical intent. He charged forward, abandoning all pretense of technique for pure aggression. His hands came up in tight fists, throwing a wild combination of punches, aimed at Chuck's head and body. The transformation was telling. Under pressure, the facade had cracked. The elaborate MMA techniques, the philosophical pretensions, the spiritual affectations, all had fallen away, revealing the simple truth beneath. a man whose identity was so deeply entwined with his image that he would abandon his principles rather than accept a challenge to that image. In the commentary booth, Frank's voice dropped to a near whisper. And there it is. When pushed, he's abandoned MMA entirely. Ray leaned in, fascinated. What do you mean? MMA philosophy emphasizes versatility and adaptation, but it's rooted in efficiency, Frank explained. What McGregor's doing now contradicts everything it stands for. On the mat, Chuck moved with purpose rather than reaction for the first time in their encounter. As McGregor's wild haymaker whistled past his ear, Chuck stepped into the opening, not away from it. His counter was simple, a basic reverse punch to the solar plexus, executed with textbook form. The technique was so fundamental that it might have been taught in the first month of training at any karate dojo worldwide. There was nothing flashy about it, nothing cinematic, just perfect structure, timing, and execution. The punch connected with controlled force, just enough to drive the air from McGregor's lungs without causing injury. McGregor stumbled back, eyes widening in surprise, one hand reflexively moving to his midsection. For a moment, he looked less like a martial arts master and more like a schoolyard bully who had finally encountered resistance. Perfect Kizami Gyakuzuki, observed a karate instructor in the third row, using the Japanese terminology for a jab followed by reverse punch combination. The kind of technique we teach white belts but executed with black belt precision. His companion nodded. That's what separates the real masters. They don't need complexity. They perfect simplicity. In the front row, Tommy clutched Chuck's watch even tighter, his eyes wide with realization. Dad, Chuck Norris could have hit him way harder, couldn't he? His father nodded gravely. Much harder. What you're seeing is control, not just of techniques, but of ego. McGregor recovered, face now contorted with undisguised rage. Whatever performance he'd been putting on had been stripped away, revealing the raw ego beneath. He closed distance again, throwing a heavy roundhouse kick aimed at Chuck's thigh, a technique drawn not from pure MMA, but from basic kickboxing, further evidence of his abandonment of his claimed art. Chuck checked the kick with a simple defensive movement, then countered with a front kick to McGregor's midsection, the same basic technique taught in first-year karate classes worldwide, but executed with flawless precision. The kick landed with controlled power, driving McGregor back once more. "Look at the hip rotation," murmured a Taekwondo black belt to her student. "Perfect transfer of power from the ground up through the body. That's what we've been working on for months." Her student nodded, eyes fixed on the mat. "But it looks so simple." "That's the point," she replied. "Mastery isn't about complexity. It's about perfecting the fundamentals until they become instinctive." McGregor, now visibly shaken both physically and mentally, glanced toward the crowd. The faces that looked back at him were not what he had expected. Instead of adulation, he saw assessment. Instead of entertainment, he saw education. The audience wasn't watching a show anymore. They were witnessing a demonstration of principles, a living lesson in the difference between appearance and substance. This realization seemed to push him over an edge. His control broke completely. With a roar of frustration that echoed through the arena, he launched forward in a full offensive flurry, hands, feet, knees, all coming at Chuck in a barrage of techniques drawn from his years of training and fight choreography. "He's lost it," Frank commented quietly. "This isn't martial arts anymore. It's just aggression." Ray, for once, had nothing to add. For several seconds, Chuck simply defended, evading and redirecting the assault with economical movements. His expression remained calm, his breathing controlled, his focus unwavering. There was no fear in his eyes, no concern, only assessment and decision. Then, as McGregor overextended himself in a particularly wild swing, Chuck made his decision. The counter came not as a flashy technique or devastating blow, but as a simple combination taught in dojos around the world. A solid block followed by a textbook reverse punch to the body and a basic front kick to create distance. The execution, however, was perfect. Chuck's block deflected McGregor's wild swing while simultaneously creating an opening. The reverse punch landed precisely at the solar plexus with enough controlled force to disrupt McGregor's breathing. The front kick followed immediately, catching McGregor off balance and sending him staggering backward. Time seemed to slow. McGregor's feet tangled beneath him as he struggled to maintain his balance. His arms windmilled in desperate circles, his body leaning at an impossible angle. For one suspended moment, he hung between standing and falling. And then gravity claimed him. He fell heavily to the mat, landing on his back with an audible thud that echoed through the now silent arena. The moment crystallized everything that had transpired between them. One man had fallen not because of spectacular technique or overwhelming force, but because of fundamental principles applied with precision and control. It wasn't violence that had brought him down. It was truth. McGregor lay on his back, blinking, up at the arena lights, the wind knocked out of him more by surprise than by force. The silence stretched for one heartbeat, 2, 3, then broke in a cascade of reactions. Some fans jumped to their feet, cheering wildly. Others remained seated, hands covering their mouths in shock. Phones captured every second from dozens of angles. In the commentary booth, Ray was speechless for perhaps the first time in his career, while Frank leaned back in his chair with the quiet satisfaction of someone who had just witnessed the confirmation of principles he had long espoused. "Ladies and gentlemen," Frank's measured voice finally filled the silence. "What we've just witnessed isn't about age or speed or strength. It's about the difference between someone who practices techniques and someone who embodies principles." On the mat, Chuck hadn't moved to press his advantage. He stood calmly, hands relaxed at his sides, waiting as McGregor pushed himself up to a sitting position, then to his knees. McGregor's face was a study in conflicting emotions: shock, humiliation, anger, and perhaps, just possibly, the first glimmer of genuine self-reflection. Santos stepped forward, positioned between them. "Exhibition complete," he announced formally, his voice carrying the weight of official conclusion. The crowd exploded into applause and chants. "Chuck! Chuck! Chuck!" The sound rolled through, the arena like thunder, a spontaneous recognition not just of what had happened, but what it meant. This wasn't simply about one man defeating another. It was about the triumph of substance over appearance, of integrity over image, of earned respect over demanded recognition. McGregor got to his feet slowly, refusing the hand that Santos offered, in assistance. He straightened his sweat-soaked shirt with jerky movements, not meeting Chuck's eyes or acknowledging the crowd. His body language spoke volumes, shoulders hunched slightly, gaze averted. The protective posture of someone whose psychological armor had been penetrated. "Lucky shot," he muttered, loud enough for those nearby to hear. The words hung in the air, a final attempt to preserve his self-image against the reality of what had just transpired. But they sounded hollow even to his own ears, a paper shield held up against a hurricane of truth. Chuck simply looked at him for a long moment, his expression neither triumphant nor condemning. There was no gloating in his eyes, no satisfaction at McGregor's humiliation, only a steady assessment, the clear gaze of a man who had no need to prove anything to himself or others. Then, with the same quiet dignity that had characterized his every movement, Chuck extended his hand. The gesture silenced the arena once more. This wasn't about victory or defeat anymore. It was about something more fundamental: respect. Not the superficial respect of fame or status, but the deeper respect of one practitioner to another, an acknowledgement of shared journey despite different paths. McGregor stared at the offered hand, conflict visible on his face. The arena quieted. Again, thousands holding their breath. In this moment, more than the exchange of techniques, McGregor's character was being tested before the world. Would he accept the hand, acknowledging both his defeat and his potential for growth, or would he reject it, clinging to his wounded pride at the cost of respect? For several tense seconds, it seemed he might refuse. His eyes flickered between Chuck's face and the extended hand, calculation visible in his expression. The crowd leaned forward collectively, sensing that this moment, more than any technique or fall, would define what they had witnessed. Then, reluctantly, he clasped Chuck's hand briefly before quickly withdrawing. The handshake was perfunctory, barely meeting the minimum requirements of sportsmanship, but it was enough. A collective breath released throughout the arena. "Good demonstration," Chuck said quietly, his voice pitched for McGregor rather than the crowd, his first complete sentence since the encounter began. The words were carefully chosen, not "good fight" or "good match," terms that would have framed their exchange as competition, not "good job" or "good effort," condescending phrases that would have added insult to injury. Good demonstration, professional acknowledgement that whatever else had happened, they had shown something valuable to those watching. The choice of words offered McGregor a dignity that his own actions had not earned, a way to frame what had happened as educational, rather than humiliating. It was perhaps the most profound aspect of Chuck's mastery. The control not just of body, but of spirit, the ability to deliver necessary lessons without unnecessary harm. Before McGregor could respond, Chuck turned and walked calmly toward the edge of the mat. His posture relaxed, his breathing even. He moved not with the swagger of victory, but with the quiet dignity of someone who had simply done what was necessary, nothing more. The young fan, Tommy, stood as Chuck approached, holding out the watch with trembling hands. "That was amazing, Mr. Norris," he blurted, awe evident in his voice. "But you didn't use any of your famous kicks or anything." Chuck took the watch, a small smile softening his features. He leaned closer to the boy, speaking just loud enough for those nearby to hear. "The best technique," he said gently, "is the one that works." He straightened, placed a hand briefly on the boy's shoulder, then turned toward the exit. Behind him, McGregor stood alone in the center of the mat. The spotlight still on him, but the crowd's attention elsewhere. His moment had come and gone, his carefully constructed image cracked by the simple reality of true skill. As Chuck disappeared through the exit tunnel, the arena erupted into thunderous applause that followed him like a wave. The legend had spoken not with words, but with the quiet eloquence of mastery. In that moment, something profound had been demonstrated to everyone present. True strength doesn't announce itself with bravado or demand recognition through intimidation. It simply exists, revealed through action rather than claimed through words. It emerges not from how many techniques one knows, but from how deeply one has internalized fundamental principles. And perhaps most importantly, it manifests not in the ability to defeat others, but in the wisdom to teach without destroying, to deliver necessary lessons with minimal harm, to offer dignity even to those who have not earned it. As the crowd began to disperse, still buzzing with what they had witnessed, McGregor remained on the mat for a moment longer, his expression unreadable. Whatever personal reckoning awaited him would happen away from the public eye. But something had changed. Not just in how others perceived him, but possibly in how he perceived himself. The exhibition would continue according to schedule, but nothing that followed could match what had already transpired. The martial arts world had been given a rare gift, a glimpse of the vast gulf between those who perform techniques and those who embody principles, between those who demand respect and those who earn it. And in that gulf lay the most profound lesson of all, one that would be discussed in dojos worldwide for years to come. True mastery lies not in what you can do to others, but in what you choose not to do. The MGM Grand hummed with electric energy long after Chuck Norris had disappeared through the exit tunnel. In the lobby, fans clustered in animated groups, phones held aloft as they compared video footage of what everyone was already calling the lesson. Social media platforms struggled under the weight of millions simultaneously uploading their recordings of the encounter. Hashtags multiplying. Chuck teaches, real martial arts, Vegas showdown. Inside the arena, the exhibition attempted to continue according to schedule. The next demonstrators, a group of wushu practitioners from Beijing, took to the mat with technical precision and theatrical flair. Their performance was objectively impressive. High-flying kicks, elaborate staff techniques, movements that combined athletic prowess with artistic expression, yet the audience's attention had fractured. Conversations about what they had witnessed, drowning out the scheduled program. "Did you see how simple his movements were?" a middle-aged karate instructor asked his colleague. "3 basic techniques, a block, a punch, and a front kick, executed perfectly." His friend nodded thoughtfully. 40 years of training distilled into fundamentals. That's what the journey is supposed to lead to, but most never arrive. Throughout the arena, similar conversations multiplied. Martial artists of various disciplines finding common ground in their appreciation of what they had witnessed. It wasn't spectacle that had impressed them, but its absence, the stripping away of everything unnecessary to reveal the essential core of effective movement. In the commentary booth, Ray Martinez sat unusually quiet, replaying the footage on a monitor, studying it with newfound respect. "I don't understand," he finally said, his microphone now off as he leaned toward Frank. "Chuck Norris barely did anything, and somehow it was the most incredible martial arts demonstration I've ever witnessed." Frank nodded, his eyes still on the exit where Chuck had disappeared. That's what real mastery looks like. Not flash, not drama, just fundamentals executed perfectly. He paused, considering his next words carefully. Most people train their entire lives and never reach that level of understanding. But it looks so simple. "That's the point," Frank replied. "Bruce Lee said it best. Before I studied the art, a punch was just a punch, and a kick just a kick. After I studied the art, a punch was no longer a punch, a kick no longer a kick. Now that I understand the art, a punch is just a punch, and a kick just a kick." Ray's brow furrowed. "What does that mean?" "It means mastery is a circle. You begin with simplicity, progress through complexity. And if you stay on the path long enough, you return to simplicity, but transformed by understanding." In the VIP section, Tommy sat with his father, replaying the video he'd captured on his phone. "Dad, look! Mr. Norris never even changed his expression, and his techniques were so basic." "That's the secret most people never understand," his father replied, watching the footage over his son's shoulder. "Mastery isn't about knowing 1,000 techniques. It's about perfecting a handful until they work in any situation." Tommy rewound the video to the moment when Chuck had spoken to him. "The best technique is the one that works," he repeated softly, the words settling into his consciousness like seeds. His father nodded, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Remember that when we're at the dojo and you're frustrated with basics, this is why we practice the same movements thousands of times." Across the arena, the exhibition organizer, Martin Chen, stood at the edge of the mat, watching the wushu demonstration. With distracted eyes, his assistant approached hesitantly. "Sir, the press is asking for statements about what happened with Norris and McGregor. How should we respond?" Chen considered the question carefully. "Tell them it was an unscheduled demonstration between 2 martial arts veterans, highlighting different approaches to traditional techniques. But, sir, it was clearly more than that." Chen turned to his assistant, his expression thoughtful. "It was. But some lessons are best left for people to discover themselves, not explained through press releases." The assistant nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. He glanced toward the now empty spot where the confrontation had taken place. "Do you think McGregor will make a statement?" "I hope not," Chen replied quietly. "Sometimes silence is the beginning of wisdom." Backstage in a private dressing room, Conor McGregor sat alone, a towel draped around his neck, staring at the floor. His elaborate silk jacket lay discarded on a chair beside him, its ornate embroidery and jade buttons now seeming ostentatious rather than impressive. The confidence that had animated his movements earlier had drained away, leaving behind a man confronting uncomfortable truths about himself. An assistant knocked timidly on the door. "Mr. McGregor, there are reporters outside who'd like a statement." "Tell them I have nothing to say," McGregor muttered, not looking up. The assistant hesitated. "Sir, the video is already trending worldwide. Maybe a positive statement about a friendly exhibition." "It wasn't friendly," McGregor cut him off, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. "And it wasn't an exhibition. It was—" He trailed off, unable to find words for what had transpired. The assistant retreated, closing the door softly. Alone again, McGregor reached for his phone, scrolling through notifications that poured in like a digital flood. Comments ranged from mockery to pity, with clips of his fall already being transformed into memes and remixes, but buried among the reactions was a different kind of message, one from an old training partner he hadn't spoken to in years. "True strength isn't about winning or losing. It's about how you handle both." McGregor stared at the words for a long moment, then set the phone down. He stood, moving to the mirror on the wall. The face that looked back at him seemed older somehow, the lines deeper, the eyes clearer than they had been in years. For perhaps the first time in decades, he saw himself without the protective layer of his own mythology. "What now?" he asked his reflection softly. The question hung in the air, unanswered but necessary. The first honest inquiry he had made of himself in longer than he could remember. Miles away from the arena in a quiet hotel suite at the Bellagio, Chuck Norris sat at the edge of a bed, phone in hand. He was speaking to his wife back home, his voice soft and measured. "No, it wasn't planned," he explained. "It just happened." He listened for a moment, a small smile touching his lips. "Yes, I know. I probably should have walked away." He glanced at the television, muted, but showing footage of the encounter that news networks were already replaying in slow motion. Analysts, breaking down each movement with the reverence usually reserved for historic sporting moments. "Sometimes walking away isn't the answer," Chuck continued. "Sometimes the lesson needs to be taught." Another pause as he listened. "I know, dear. I'll be home tomorrow." He ended the call and sat quietly for a moment, reflections settling across his features. Throughout his long career, he had faced countless opponents in competition, on movie sets, in life's various challenges. But today's confrontation hadn't been about proving his skills or defending his reputation. It had been about something more fundamental, the difference between appearance and substance, between claiming mastery and embodying it. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. When he opened it, he found the exhibition organizer, Martin Chen, standing in the hallway. "Mr. Norris," Chen said with a respectful bow, "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all," Chuck replied, gesturing for him to enter. "I was expecting you." Chen stepped inside, declining the offered seat with a polite shake of his head. "I wanted to thank you personally," he said. "What happened today wasn't on our program, but it was perhaps the most valuable demonstration we could have offered." Chuck nodded slightly, acknowledging the comment without pride. "It wasn't my intention to create a spectacle." "You didn't," Chen replied. "That was what he was trying to do. You created a moment of truth instead." He paused, choosing his next words carefully. "I've been organizing martial arts exhibitions for 20 years. I've seen spectacular techniques, amazing athleticism, ancient forms preserved through generations, but I've rarely seen the essence of martial arts demonstrated so clearly." Chuck remained silent, allowing Chen to continue. "The simplicity," Chen said, a note of wonder in his voice. "The perfect timing, the control, not just physical but emotional, the respect offered even when it wasn't earned." He shook his head slightly. "These are the principles we try to teach but rarely get to witness at such a high level. I'm not proud of having to demonstrate them that way," Chuck replied quietly. "But sometimes lessons need visible examples." Chen nodded. "That's why I came to ask if you would consider speaking at tomorrow's closing ceremony. Not about the incident specifically, but about the principles it demonstrated, the journey from techniques to principles, from complexity back to simplicity." Chuck considered the request thoughtfully. "I'm not much for public speaking." "I know," Chen said with a small smile, "but after today you wouldn't need many words. Your actions have already spoken volumes." Chuck nodded slowly. "I'll be there." After Chen departed, Chuck returned to his quiet reflection. On the television, analysts were still dissecting the footage frame by frame. One particular commentator, a former UFC champion turned sports analyst, was making a point that captured Chuck's attention. "What we witnessed wasn't just about martial arts," the analyst was saying. "It was about something more universal. The difference between those who perform and those who embody, between those who seek to impress and those who seek to understand." Chuck turned off the television, letting silence fill the room. The analyst had touched on something important, the way certain principles transcend their specific contexts, becoming metaphors for broader truths. Today's encounter hadn't just been about MMA versus karate or movie stars versus real fighters. It had been about approaching life itself with either authenticity or performance, with substance or appearance. Back at the arena, the exhibition was concluding. The commentators offered final thoughts as the crowd began to disperse, still buzzing with excitement. "What we witnessed today goes beyond martial arts," Frank said, his voice carrying the weight of understanding. "We saw the difference between someone who practices techniques and someone who lives principles." Ray nodded uncharacteristically, thoughtful. "I came expecting to see spectacular kicks and dramatic techniques. Instead, I learned what real martial arts looks like. And that," Frank concluded, "is the legacy Chuck Norris leaves behind. Not the memes, not the movie stunts, but the understanding that true mastery isn't about how it looks. It's about how it works." As attendees filed out of the arena, Tommy and his father walked slowly, deep in conversation. "Will Mr. McGregor be okay?" the boy asked, glancing back toward the stage. His father considered the question carefully. "His body will be fine. His pride, that might take longer to heal, but sometimes a lesson like this is necessary." "What lesson?" "That respect. Can't be demanded. It has to be earned. That true strength doesn't need to announce itself. And most importantly," he placed a hand on his son's shoulder, "that the most powerful techniques aren't the flashiest ones. They're the ones you've practiced until they become part of who you are." Tommy nodded slowly, understanding dawning in his eyes. He looked down at his phone, replaying the video once more, focusing not on the fall, but on Chuck's calm composure throughout the encounter. "I want to train like that," he said quietly. "Not to look cool, but to be real." His father smiled. "That's the first step on the true path." Outside the MGM Grand, the Las Vegas evening had fallen, neon lights painting the strip in vibrant colors. People streamed from the arena into the night, carrying with them not just footage of an unexpected confrontation, but a deeper lesson about the nature of true mastery. In martial arts dojos across the world, the footage would soon become a teaching tool, not to mock one man's fall, but to illustrate timeless principles, Economy of motion, perfect timing, balance, control, the fundamentals that separate those who perform martial arts from those who embody them. For Conor McGregor, the night marked a painful but necessary reckoning, a chance to rediscover humility and perhaps in time rebuild his approach to the arts he claimed to master. Whether he would embrace this opportunity or retreat further into his carefully constructed image remained to be seen, but the seed of potential transformation had been planted, waiting for the courage to nurture it. For Chuck Norris, it was simply another day of living the principles he had spent a lifetime refining, letting his actions speak the truths that words could never adequately express. His legacy secured not through marketing or mythology, but through the consistent application of fundamentals, both in technique and in character. The following morning, at the exhibition's closing ceremony, Chuck stepped onto the mat one final time. The arena fell silent as he took the microphone, his presence commanding respect without demanding it. "Martial arts isn't about what you can do to others," he said simply. "It's about what you can do with yourself." He paused, letting the words settle across the attentive crowd. "The journey begins with learning techniques," he continued. "But it must eventually lead to understanding principles. Techniques are finite. You can only learn so many in a lifetime. Principles are infinite. They apply in endless situations." His gaze swept across the audience, making brief contact with Tommy in the front row. "The greatest challenge isn't mastering complex movements. It's mastering yourself, your ego, your fear, your desire for recognition. When you achieve that, you discover that the most powerful techniques are often the simplest ones, executed with perfect timing and control." He handed the microphone back to Chen, nodded once to the crowd, and exited the stage with the same quiet dignity that had characterized his every movement. The legend of the Vegas showdown would grow with time, details embellished. The fall, perhaps more dramatic in retelling, but those who were there would remember the real lesson. True strength doesn't shout. It doesn't need to. It simply is. Up next, we have two more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe.